Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Eckstein Hall, Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people we say are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. Today, we are joined by the Milwaukee County Sheriff, David A. Clarke, Jr. Won't you please give him a warm welcome to Marquette University Law School. Sheriff, good to have you. Thank you. This is, I think, Sheriff Clarke's first visit back with us since we were over in the old building. We were talking about that when you arrived today. Things have changed a little bit, haven't they, since the last time you were at the law school?
So, it seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't.
It wasn't that long ago,
right.
yeah. We're going to talk about a lot of different topics today, but I wanted to begin by asking the sheriff about his role in this community. And you're a law enforcement guy. That's your background, 35 plus years. But I think many of us in this room see you taking on a role beyond that. So I want to begin there. How do you view your role in this community today?
Well, it's a number of things, and it's I believe it's multifaceted. It's as a public servant. It's as a cop, career cop, using the bully pulpit, if you will, to talk about issues that some people might find unpleasant, that don't want to talk about, would rather we not talk about. But I think it's important to have discourse in our society here, in our city. I believe in a clash of ideas. I believe in dissent. I think dissent is an important part in our democracy, that we have different schools of thought. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't all have to think the same. What I like to say is, I'm not right on all these things, neither am I wrong on all these things. I'm just from one particular school of thought. You might be from a different school of thought. That's fine. That's that clash of ideas, and that's what I try to promote.
So you were named sheriff in 2002. Then Governor Scott McCallum named you that job. You've been reelected since then. Have you evolved as a public figure during the last decade or so?
A lot, and nothing can prepare you for these types of positions, these elected positions when you happen to be an executive. It's on-the-job learning, if you will. You grow into these positions, you make mistakes, you learn from them, you get better, you get more confident. And I think that's the biggest thing that has gone on with me, is I've grown more confident in this role and on some of these issues and topics that we need to talk about. So growing into these positions is really what happens.
You like to stir things up from time to time. You become, you're a lightning rod at times. Are you comfortable in that role?
I'm just a city boy. Just a
Marquette University high school grad.
Yeah, because it's that clash of ideas that I talked about, that discourse. If we don't talk about some of these things, we'll never solve them. We can act like they're not there. Some people, that's their style. Let's not talk about it. I liken it to my relationship with my doctor. All right, my doctor's got some bad news or some things I don't want to talk about. I want him or her to tell me, regardless of how unpleasant it is. And I'm not going to argue with him or her about the way they delivered it. Because if I'm going to get on a course of treatment action, I got to know what's going on. All right, and so that's why I think that, you call it stirring things up. I do challenge the status quo. I'm not a status quo guy. All right, I'm one that believes that if things are going to get better, they have to change. And change can be messy, which is when you see this discourse come about. Most of you folks in here, you understand that. Bureaucracy drives me nuts. Bureaucracy has a tendency to get in the way and slow things down and obstruct some of the progress that we need to see. So I fight that stuff. And when you challenge the status quo, you're going to get a lot of pushback. You're going to get a lot of blowback from people who are entrenched bureaucrats, people who are vested in keeping things the way that they are. But again, if it's going to get better, it has to change. And in order to change, there's going to be conflict, confrontation, but I believe in that sort of stirring the pot, if you will.
So what is it that you say we don't want to talk about in Milwaukee?
The the soft underbelly, if you will, of some of the pathologies that are going on in the city of Milwaukee. I'm going to venture to guess that everybody in here kind of knows what they are: the poverty, the crime, the unemployment, the failing schools, and I could throw some more in there, but I believe that those are the risk factors that are really holding this city back.
And you say there is a political class in this city that doesn't want to talk about this, that doesn't want to address it. Who is the political class, and what do you mean when you say they don't want to address it?
Well, entrenched bureaucrats, for one, and other political figures. When I say that I want to talk about it, here's what I mean by that. And I always say, well, where's the plan? That's what we need to talk about. Where is the plan to deal with the rising poverty? All right, we're now according to the Journal Sentinel anyway, fourth poorest city in America. The failing schools, 8th grade, 4th grade math and reading scores of black students at MPS, and MPS is predominantly minority, black, Hispanic, some white, but it's predominantly minority. 4th poorest math and reading scores in the nation, or I'm not 4th, near the bottom of large K-12 public urban education systems. We are failing generations of kids. That's the largest education system we have, the K-12 public education. We need a thriving MPS. I don't want MPS to go away, but I want them to do a better job of educating kids so that these kids can grow up and take advantage of the opportunities that I had to reach my God-given potential. I'm in these schools, I see these kids, and it really pains me to see and to look out into a classroom full of kids who can't read at grade level. Okay? They can't read words on paper and derive any meaning from them. The illiteracy, I think that they're mass-producing illiteracy. And we can sit here and say, well, it's not all the teachers. I know all that. But while we're discussing that, generations of kids coming through are failing. And so we're failing them. I'm failing them. All right? So I say, when you mention, what do you mean you won't talk about? Where's the plan to turn the schools around? The written plan. That's what we need to talk about. When we talk about the unemployment, black unemployment in the city of Milwaukee, I've seen it somewhere around 32%. If I'm off a percent or two, doesn't matter to me. If it's 32, 33, if it's 30 for black males. The national average, I've read, of black unemployment in the United States is about 16%. So we're double the national average in terms of unemployment. All right? So you see this widening achievement gap, and I look at these things and I just go, where's the plan from the political class? Where's the plan to turn this stuff around? Does the plan include timetables? Does it include benchmarks so we can gauge the progress? But what I sense too often is it's full of platitudes. We need to do better. I'm concerned. We need to do more. Yeah, we all know that. But where's the plan to accomplish?
Well, you've kind of now entered this political arena. You're weighing in on these topics and the challenges facing Milwaukee. Is it fair for people out there in the audience to say, well, okay, it's easy to criticize, but what's your plan? What would you do differently? For example, what would you do to address the lack of success in reading scores for 4th and 8th graders in Milwaukee? What would David Clarke do?
I think it's very fair to do that. I think everything starts with a vision for the city, from the city leaders. I talk about Tom Barrett a lot, but he is the chief executive of the city that I live in. All right? I'm a contributing taxpayer with the property my wife and I own that's declining in value, that I'm not real happy about, that we're not real happy about. Because I am a property taxpayer in the city of Milwaukee, I believe that it gives me license to critique the city leadership, whether they like it or not. Okay? And so, yeah, it's very fair to say, well, what would you do? Well, I remind people of this first and foremost. Well, it's easy to ask me, but I'm not the mayor. Let's go ask Tom Barrett first, and then we'll come and ask me, because I'm not the mayor. I'm the sheriff, but I'm not the mayor. But then I follow it up with this. Okay, it starts with a vision. And I say, what's the vision for the city of Milwaukee? I rarely hear about it. Maybe there is one, but if I have to say to myself, maybe, that means it's not being communicated. A vision you have to communicate over and over and over so that the people of the city, the people, the stakeholders, not just the residents, the stakeholders, the businesses, the institutions of the city can have confidence that we're on a pathway somewhere and we can see where that's going to lead us, and then the plan is how we're going to get there, because you can't just have vision without a plan. So I would throw something out like this. Here'd be my vision. I try to keep things simple. A better quality of life for the people in the city of Milwaukee. That includes the businesses, that includes the residents, and everybody else that's a part of a better quality of life. What does that mean? That's the plan, right? Better schools for your kids to go to. All right? Jobs to deal with the unemployment. All right? Rebuilding neighborhoods. What's that going to take in part? Lower crime. All right? That's a plan. And then you can break that down even further, but the vision, a better quality of life. I never hear that communicated. And that's, I think, the first step is communicating a vision, and then the plan is just as important, a written plan, not just platitudes. Because I want a better quality of life, but then people should ask me, well, how are you going to get us there? I'm going to get you better schools. I'm going to get you businesses in here that can employ people, adequate housing, on and on and on.
Let me just follow up on that. But for education, I mean, the options available to us, or we could say we're going to do more on voucher schools, more on charter schools. Test results don't show a great deal of difference between what they're doing and MPS. We could talk about a mayoral takeover of MPS, or having the mayor essentially run the system. Do any of those things appeal to you if you were trying to address the educational performance of our kids?
Any and all of them. I think that any sort of reform with MPS has to include a number of things, all right? We have to consider the voucher program, regardless of how we feel about it politically. We have a waiting list of parents in the city of Milwaukee, and every time I say this, I have to almost control myself, that in 2014, in the United States of America, we have parents on a waiting list to get their kid into a school of their choice, a better school potentially. Maybe it turns out not to be a better school, but a waiting list? What if we had a waiting list in the city to get on the voter roll? Which you got to wait your turn. We got a list. Take a number and stand in line. I mean, we'd all be like, we'd go nuts, right? A waiting list for a quality school. So I think vouchers has to be a part of it. We need to fix MPS. And what does that mean, fix MPS? Well, we've got to look at the graduation rates, the reading, math scores, and we've got to figure out, why aren't we able to educate these kids? I understand, Mike, that these kids come into these classrooms with a lot of baggage. I understand that. They're not in a state of readiness to learn. I hear this from teachers. I understand that. All right? But we're passing them through the system. How come we're moving them from the third grade to the fourth grade if they can't read at third grade level? Why are we moving them from the sixth grade to the seventh grade? So we're just pushing them through this system, and you look at the truancy rates and you look at the graduation rates, well, for $1.2 billion a year, that's the budget for MPS. We run the city on that much. I think the city's budget, 1.5, I don't have the exact, but it's over $1 billion. We run an entire city that has about 600,000 residents in it. On a little over $1 billion, we can't run a thriving K-12 public education system that has 88,000 kids for $1.2 billion, and we can't do a better job than we're doing now. So we need a thriving MPS. Charter. Charter schools. So it's going to be a number of interventions for education reform. But while we're having this discussion, guess what's happening or not happening? Kids aren't learning. So we don't get 5 years to do this, because now we got 5 years of failure. This has got to be done like now. And now I think we have a tremendous opportunity with Dr. Thornton moving on. And I knew him personally. I like the guy. I didn't want to see him go, but you know what? Good for him. If he found some place that he'd rather be, that's fantastic. But now we have an opportunity to maybe do things a little differently in terms of how the school system, the structure is set up. All right? I'm a proponent of mayoral control. Why? First of all, because the way we're doing it now is archaic, running these large school systems with a school board. And somebody has to be responsible for the failure. I think the chief executive of the city has to be willing to get their arms around some of these issues and say, this problem's mine. And I don't mean that the mayor runs the school system, but he or she's going to be accountable for its success or its failure. And right now what I see too often is we look at all these things going on, reading math scores, and people say, well, there's only so much I can do. I don't run the school system. Well, somebody needs to go to Madison because you can't just come in and say, I'm taking the school system over. You know that. We're going to need changes in Madison. Somebody has to be willing to go to Madison. That somebody's the chief executive and say, this mayoral control concept, and maybe we'll do it a little differently, but there are models out there already. But I want to make the legislative changes to get that going. And then you got to come back home, meaning Milwaukee, from Madison. And now you got to sell this to who? Stakeholders, parents, residents, people who are paying into the system, right? You got to sell it to them because they're going to want to, well, what are you going to do with it? And this is a little scary. It's a lot of change. And then you have to get that done. And as long as we're all just going to sit here and watch all this happen and say, wow, this is horrible. Wow, this is terrible. Oh, yeah, we got to do more. But those are platitudes, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think that's enough.
Let me ask you this, because I'm sure anybody sitting in this room is listening to you talk about this subject or other subjects. We'll talk about crime. We'll talk about some other things in a moment. But people are probably sitting in this room going, you sound an awful lot like a guy who's going to run for mayor someday, like in 2016. Presuming you run for re-election as sheriff and are re-elected, but somebody who is definitely giving this some thought. And my understanding is, listening to you in recent events, you are giving this some serious thought. Is that correct?
I will be. I mean, that's 2016. That's a little bit down the road.
But you will be thinking about this.
Sure, without a doubt. I made that clear. I said I will get some trusted advisors together, sit down. I'm not one. You don't just jump into a race for whatever office. All right, you got to look at the viability, and that's what I'll look at. If I decide that it's doable, taking on an incumbent is tough. 94% of incumbents nationwide in elections win re-election. There's a reason for that. Can I raise the money? All these. That's the discussion I'll be having with some trusted people whose advice and counsel I take. Maybe it's viable, maybe it's not. If it's not, I'm not going to do it. But if it is, it's something that I will consider. But more so than that, and I know everybody, and that's the sexy stuff to tie it into what are his future plans and endeavors and ambitions. I'm from this city. I think I mentioned it, born and raised here. This isn't the city that I grew up in. All right, we had great, MPS was one of the top school systems in the United States of America, K-12 public ed. All right, jobs were everywhere. Neighborhoods were safe, relatively. With a minimal amount of education, you could find a job. But that era is over. Unfortunately, the Industrial Revolution is over. Many of these industries moved to other countries. Many of them went out of business, and there was nothing to replace it. But for me, I want this for my hometown, so it's not everything that I say is tied around running for mayor. It's let's get something going here. Let's reverse this downward trend and bend that curve back in an upward direction to give people a better quality of life, a better way to give our students and our young people a chance to meet their God-given potential. They all have potential. Every single one of them. We got to bring it out of them. I know the opportunities I had because of the road that was paved for me by my mom and dad. Okay, and they didn't have a lot of money. We weren't of a lot of means and everything. But my dad, the sense of discipline in me, they poured what little they had into their family and raising the kids and whatnot, at least to give us a platform. And then at some point, they said, it's going to be up to you from here, son, but we're going to help you build a platform with decent education, sense of discipline, some of these things. So I want this for the next generation of people because, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? I kind of reached the pinnacle of my profession. I'm the chief executive of a law enforcement agency. That's, at some point in my police career, I said that's what I want to do. I got my education. I just recently went back and completed my master's degree. I didn't really need a master's degree to assist me in my upward mobility in law enforcement, but you know what? I wanted to continue to grow. I also wanted to do that as an example to young people. Education, learning's never over. Never. Keep on learning, keep on developing. And so that's what I want for other people, and that's what I want for people coming after me, because I could check out tomorrow, either through some act of God, or I could just say, you know what, I'm done, I want to move on to something else. But it isn't about me anymore. What about the people coming after me? My attitude could be, David, don't upset people. Leave it alone. Let them fend for themselves. But that's not right, because this city didn't do that to me when I was coming up through it.
You wrote something late last year, and I remember the final line in it was something to the effect of, and I hope I'm quoting this accurately, move over Detroit, make way for Milwaukee. Do you really believe that's the potential future of this community?
I really do, and I can walk you through it. Many of the pathologies that I talked about here, the high unemployment, the high poverty, the failing schools, the crime, and there's some other risk factors, but it's enough to try to fix right there. Detroit had the same thing. Detroit had failing public schools. Detroit had high crime. Detroit had immense deep poverty, crumbling neighborhoods. And I never thought it was going to happen either. Okay, it will and it can if you neglect the risk factors. I'll go back to the health model, right? You catch stuff early, and what do we say for health? Early intervention, right? For breast cancer, for colon cancer, early intervention. That's important. I like to use that same model. Let's intervene now with this poverty so that we're not standing up here 5 years from now and looking at being the top poorest city in America, or even third or second. Let's intervene now with the failing schools. Let's start educating these kids now. Howard Fuller said it. Howard Fuller said, we're closer to Detroit than you think. Howard Fuller is a mentor of mine. All right, he said it also. You know why? He's not going to deny the obvious. We're in trouble. We can turn this around. We can save this. If we were a hospital patient, I'd say we're in serious condition. We aren't critical yet. I don't want to wait till we're critical. Detroit did that. Didn't work. Detroit in its heyday, a population about 2 million people, somewhere in there, 1.7, 2 million people. Today about 600,000, 700,000. I haven't been to Detroit lately. I don't know why I'd want to at this point. Not to knock Detroit, but I hear it's just nothing but a vast wasteland. All the houses, they started on some program to tear down all the dilapidated housing. Just vacant lots. I don't want that to happen here. All right? I was over in the area of 24th and Center the other day.
It's where a homicide took place, right?
Yeah, and somebody in the back might now be able to see this. Boarded up home, broken out windows, North 24th Street, somewhere over around Center Street. There's a lot of boarded up homes in the city of Milwaukee. We're reading about it in the news. There was an article Sunday. All right, and now there's some plan and fine, to do something with tear them down, whatever, and money to raise them. That's lost property tax revenue. Okay, so you see how this thing, it all contributes. And why do I talk about these things? Because they all have a nexus to crime. Failing schools, kids who are not educated are more likely to have to lead lives of crime. Right? Unemployment, okay, poverty, all risk factors for crime. That's why the sheriff is talking about these things, because we can't look at this, well, how are we going to, Sheriff, how can we reduce crime? I say, fix the schools. Find people jobs. Sheriffs don't, cops don't, chiefs, they don't do that. What we are is, we're the firewall between orderly society and chaos. That's what we do, and that's what we do, I think, fairly well. All All right? That's what we do. But as long as the pipeline into this criminal justice system is going to be the result of failing schools, poverty, unemployment, kids growing up without fathers and that sort of thing, we'll never get a handle on this from a law enforcement perspective. So I say let's deal with the risk factors. Cops can go out and do the things that they do well, but let's deal with the risk factors so we can slow that influx of people into the criminal justice system and resorting to crime because, I don't know, despair, no other sort of way, lack of social skills, on and on and on. That's why I talk about these things.
Let me ask one follow-up, and then I want to talk to you about the firewall comment you just made. If you run for mayor, I think in politics today, a lot of people want an optimistic vision of the city. You've talked at length here, and I know you feel strongly about this, about the flaws in Milwaukee, the problems in Milwaukee. And yet, some people see another side to the story. For the first time in a long time, you have people actually moving into the city. The population has grown some in the last 5 years. You've got younger people coming to this area, calling it home. Can you talk at length about the kind of issues you just talked about, and yet still present an optimistic vision that appeals to people who see great things for Milwaukee in the future?
Sure. When and if, and don't read a whole lot into that. If I were the mayor, I'd be setting the vision. That's the hope. The vision. Why people would ask me to set the vision I'm not the chief executive of the city. So what I found interesting when I made the statement that I would sit down after my re-election this fall and consider the viability of a mayoral run, I was encouraged by the buzz it created, good, bad, or indifferent. I said to myself, at least we still have a pulse. Some people don't like the idea, that's fine. Some people like it, some people are excited about it. The area needs something to look forward to get excited about. And that's what I took away from that. I said, even the people who said, I hope he does, well, at least they offered some sort of statement about it. Like I said, this is doable. This is fixable. I've seen it happen. I've seen this renaissance. I've seen these resurgence of cities, all right, that have turned these things around. Metropolitan areas with the same sort of issues that this metropolitan. Cities are unique conglomerations. They really are. It might not be the best word. But if people don't have any real hope that somebody here has some sort of plan or idea that I want to, that they want to get behind and whatnot, it makes it tough. So you mentioned there are some people moving in this city. We have areas like the 3rd Ward. It's tremendous, right? We have some things going on downtown, Bayview. We have some things going downtown with this couture and all. Some great things going on. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Because this will be real easy to do. You will never reach your potential as a city if you leave a significant portion of your population behind. And that's what we think that we can do. So for all of the growth and the development going on, we still got high poverty. We still got high unemployment for a segment of people, mainly minorities. We cannot leave those people behind. They've got to come with us. So yeah, we can look at all the good stuff. I'll go to the medical model again. I go in to see the doctor, get a checkup. David, mental health is good. This is good. Lungs check out, all this, but your heart is, man, you got clogged arteries. You got this. Doc, I'm not going to worry about that because look at all this good stuff you just told me about. I'm just going to ignore it. You can't do that, right? You got to deal with the bad ticker. Otherwise, all this other good stuff, the organs are all functioning and they look good, the blood work, isn't going to do you any good if your heart fails you. That's how I look at this and you say, well, I talk about the stuff that's important. Because we are not going to reach our potential leaving this minority community, and mainly minorities, but it isn't just minorities. In these neighborhoods, a growing number that are in advanced stages of urban decay, we're not going to I want to reach our potential. I don't want to just do all right for a certain segment of the population here, like you and I. I'm doing fine. My wife and I, far northwest side, a little quiet street, dead-end street, rural, built our home 16, 17 years. We're doing okay. Easy for us to say, oh, there's not a lot of crime over here. Well, but what about the rest of the city? We got to bring it along.
I want to ask you just a couple more questions. We will open it up to questions from the audience. You have become an outspoken defender of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and you spoke about it even recently at the CPAC convention out in Washington. You just feel strongly about it. Have you always felt that way about it, or is that something that you sort of arrived at over the course of your career?
Well, with what I've been doing for 35 years in terms of playing a role in public safety, the citizens have always played a role. It's part of it. Self-defense is first law in nature. Survival. The Second Amendment is a part of the Constitution. All right, I put my hand on the Bible and said I will support the Constitution of the United States. I don't get to pick and choose. Now, I understand some of these are very political and they're lightning rod issues, right? Second Amendment, but it's part of the Constitution. Right? And if we want to change that, that's fine, but there's a process to change it. But let's look at the self-defense aspect of it. What I said was there are situations, and I said this after a lengthy crime spree that we had going on in the city, where I saw good law-abiding people. And the overwhelming majority of people, even in these neighborhoods, they're good law-abiding people. Being ravaged with crime and violence. The woman the other day sitting in a car in traffic takes a bullet in the head in crossfire of in a shootout. Okay, but I saw a series of things going on, and I said, you know what? It's time for citizens to play a more active role. How can they do this? We have to define what that role is. We in law enforcement, we always tell citizens, get involved, step up, play a role. Well, we have to tell them what that role is. There are certain situations in your lives when, I call it the wolf is at the door. Someone's got the gun up against your head, or you look and you see somebody's following you, or someone's breaking into your home. Cops aren't going to be there right away. It's just not possible. I said, here's some things to think about. I didn't say get a gun and start shooting. Anybody who heard the ads, I say this, and I don't mean to insult anybody in this room. Anybody who heard those ads, I said, only a moron doesn't know what I was talking about. Because I said, consider taking a firearm safety course. That's responsible. I didn't say, go get a gun and defend yourself. Consider taking a firearm safety course. And had the woman a couple weeks ago where the 4-year-old shot himself, I think it was a young man, or not really a man at 4, but had she have taken a firearm safety course, one of the things they teach you is the safe storage of a firearm in your home when you're around kids. Maybe if she'd have done that, that wouldn't have happened. So what I'm talking about in terms of the Second Amendment, we have rights. With rights come responsibilities. So I said, here's some things to think about. Someone's breaking into your home. No, you can't just point a gun in a direction like Joe Biden said and just start shooting. You can't. That's not responsible. Citizens, we got away from telling people this. That's what made it so shocking. What has law enforcement been telling people for the last couple of decades? Just call 911. Well, guess what? The wait time to get a squad there for some very serious calls for service in the city are growing longer and longer. It's for some serious calls. So what are people to do? I said, here's some things to think about.
You don't think that needlessly alarms people throughout the community who somehow feel that they are in jeopardy, that conditions are so bad that they need to arm themselves because intruders are going to be breaking through their windows and doors?
It's the reality, and it's happening. And it's happening. And it's happening in the areas, maybe not where you and I live. Maybe we don't have to consider those things as much. But for a growing number of people in this city, that's the reality of it. So I said, you got to start thinking about this stuff. Here's some things you can do to keep yourself safe. That's the role that citizens play. You have a duty and responsibility to defend yourself and your family. It's a duty. I do not encourage citizens to start policing the streets. I said to protect yourself and your family. You do. You have a duty, whether you want it or not. And when it's a duty, you know what that means? You don't have a choice. You have a duty to protect yourself and your family. There's any number of ways of doing that. That's what I threw out there, right? So shame on us that in law enforcement that for several decades all we did was call 911, call 911. Well, I don't know. Maybe, but maybe not. See, the choice is yours. I trust law-abiding citizens with firearms. I just do.
You, over time, this kind of plays into that. I think over time it would be safe to say that you become less of a fan of government in general, federal government, probably even local government to some extent. I hear you talking about individuals needing to act in the defense of individuals. Give us your views on government and how those have evolved over time.
Well, no, I'm not a big believer, if you will, in government taking on an expanded role. And here's what I mean by that. I believe there are 5 pillars that make up a society, community, society. Strong families, thriving schools, businesses that can employ people, a limited role for government. Yeah, we're part of this community, society thing. And then a role for the church. And look what's happened over time. First of all, church and God have been marginalized, right? You can hardly talk about God in a public square. So there's one of the pillars, gone. Strong families, not so much in the areas that I'm talking about, gone. Successful schools, not hardly, gone. So it only leaves a couple left, right? One of those is government. What's happened is government has tried to replace these other pillars that have disappeared. It doesn't work. You've got to have all 5 of them, and they each have a defined role, and they're all limited. So that's why when I say this expanded government will never replace the family, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of when I said strong families, never. They've never done a good job of that. All right? God, faith, however you want to, is part of this. A sense of community, right? Strong families, businesses are leaving. That's the other one I left out when I said there's only one left. Government's tried to replace employment and businesses, what? Handing out stuff, right? So government has taken on the role of the other 4 pillars. If that's a sense of community, and this was holding it up before, you got this. It's just not going to work. That's why I say that the expanded, there is a role for government, but it's not going to replace the other 4. So as long as we're going to have more of a reliance on government, we're going to continue to have these problems, because I'll tell you what, some of this is, faith-based community could play a role here. All right? We need strong businesses, thriving businesses to employ people. Government cannot take the place of that. So government really can be a catalyst to support those other 4 structures. Because government does do schools, right? K-12 public ed. We're not doing so good here. So that's what I mean when I'm not anti-government, but as I see government move these other 4 pillars out of the way, to me it's no wonder that we're in the straits that we're in.
Here's my last question, then we'll take questions from the audience. You and I have talked about this before. Should you run for re-election as sheriff, when would you announce that? How soon in the scheme of things can we expect an announcement?
Well, I already did. thepeoplesheriff.com. I have my website up and going. I made that clear last fall when I was interviewed by the Waukesha Freeman newspaper. They did a Q&A, and one of the first questions, are you going to seek re-election for sheriff? And I said, yes, I am. So that's, maybe you're talking about the formality where you're going and signing your papers and whatnot.
Yes.
That'll happen within the next month or so.
Okay.
But that's a foregone conclusion. I'm going to seek re-election. I like what I do. It's an honor to work for the government. It's not a right. It's a privilege. I bleed blue. I'm a cop through and through. It's all I've known for 35 years. All my education, my bachelor's is criminal justice management. My master's is in security studies. All of my training, FBI training, just a whole laundry list of training has all been law enforcement. I bleed blue. I'm a cop through and through. And as long as the people of this county are going to allow me to serve them in this capacity, I still have a lot of fire in the belly, if you can't tell. And I want to continue to do that, but that's up to the voters. Right?
All right, here's the other part of this conversation we've had. I've said, why do you run as a Democrat? Because I think it's pretty clear to most people who listen to you here or see where you appear, who you speak to, that you're probably, your political views might be more closely aligned with a conservative viewpoint. Why run as a Democrat?
Yeah, first of all, I am a conservative. All right, what does that mean?
So I saw that correctly. I figured that out. That's, I was accurate on that one.
Here's what that means to me. Limited government, all right? Strong national defense, safe streets here at home, that the Constitution protects individuals, that you don't derive your constitutional guarantees through membership in a group. It's their individual freedoms, all right? And I also believe in more rights for the states. That's what the Founding Fathers wanted, all right? They didn't want a strong central government out of Washington, D.C. So that's what it means to me. I don't believe that's the sole province of any political party. You can probably make the argument, but I believe the Republicans and Democrats who want safer streets and be safe from foreign threats and limited government. So, I think there's a little difference between that ideologically and membership in some political party. First of all, as it relates to law enforcement, it doesn't matter. I don't think law enforcement should be a partisan office. It is. So, I deal with life the way it is, not as I wish. I grew up in a family. My mom and dad were not politically active at all, but they tended to vote Democrat. All right? It's a different party. My mom and dad were Jack Kennedy Democrats, right? What did JFK say? Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Self-help. I don't know, does that make him a Republican because he advocated self-help and lower taxes? No. They were Bobby Kennedy Democrats. They were Truman Democrats. Truman got rid of the segregated military that I had. My father fought in a segregated army. He had every reason not to, right? Why should he fight for a country that still supported discrimination, Jim Crow laws, because he believed in the promise of this country. So he wrote a blank check. He actually fought in Korea, airborne ranger, had several combat jumps, dropping out of the sky, getting shot at. He gave me my stake in America. He fought for this country, put his life at risk, okay? But you look today, and here's what I say, because here's one of the questions that really just, people say, well, he's not a real Democrat. I go, what's a real Democrat? What is it? I don't know. George Wallace. Governor George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door at University of Alabama, said, segregation now, segregation forever. He was a Democrat. Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia. An admitted, avowed member of the Ku Klux Klan. Democrat. All right. Al Gore Sr., senator from Tennessee, was one of the more vociferous people on the Hill fighting against civil rights legislation. Democrat. Am I that kind of Democrat? Of course not. So that's why what does it mean to be a real Democrat like George Wallace or Robert Byrd? So I just think that whole discussion, and you can have it if you want, but for me I think it's futile. It's like, well, what is a real Democrat? Here's what I'm for. And we like to label people. We do that as human beings. We do it to each other. I do it. We label, we want to put him in a box. Well, he's not this, he's this. You can have those discussions. But what my mom and dad used to say to me, don't let someone else's views become how you think about yourself. So if you want to, well, he's a Republican, he's this, he's mad, he's big, ugly, whatever. And that's really the way I feel. So I made a decision almost 12 years ago to run as a Democrat. Based on my mom and dad, who were not politically active, but They did. I mean, my dad was a union member. My mom was a union member. My mom worked in, she was a teacher's aide for MPS. My dad was a letter carrier at the post office, 36 years or so. Union members. So all this, well, he's anti-union. I go, well, whatever. What's important to me is that my heart's in the right place. I want a better way of life for people in this city. So folks can have the argument, is he this, is he that? I get to decide what I am. And am I ideologically pure? Am I ideologically, do I ideologically conform? Not in any aspect of my life. David Clarke will decide for himself what kind of Democrat he wants to be, a conservative one. You can do that. I think that's about really all I need. And that argument's been going on here for 12 years, and I go, no, this is what's important, not what David Clarke is. The kids are important, the neighborhoods are important, not what David Clarke is. So I try to remind people, it isn't about me. You can make it about me if you want, but I'm going to put the focus back on what's important to me, and it's you folks.
Let's take a few questions here. Please, no long statements. Just we want questions, okay? So raise your hand.
I get to make the long statement.
Yeah. If you're in the seating bowl, press down on the rim, not on that little ball, but on the rim right next to it, and keep your finger down on that. So raise your hand if you have a question. Question. You'll be okay. There you go. Just keep it down.
Okay. I've worked on the high school problem for quite some years, and I'm on a project right now for the May 17th celebration of Brown versus Board of Education. And it keeps coming up that the problem is not the schools, but what does not go on at home. Mm-hmm. The schools are pretty good. A lot of the best teachers have left for different reasons because they're worried about their pensions, they had to pay more for health care and everything else.
So that if the schools are
failing, then part of the problem is the political problem that took money away from the schools. But we need to do something with what is not going on at home, so when the kids go home, there is still learning, and there is not in many communities.
Okay. I don't know. I think there was a question in there.
Well, how are you going to solve that problem?
All right.
The bottom line, I'll ask it in the question. I think he's saying these issues go far beyond the schools. They're family issues, and really, what can we do about family? Those are individual decisions being made in some cases.
You're right. Everything that you said, I, for the most part, would have to agree with. I mentioned that. I said these kids come into these schools. We take these kids with all this baggage, things you talked about, all right? The things going on at home or not going on at home, ineffective parenting. Didn't adequately prepare these kids before they got to school age, didn't read to them, all these things. I understand that, okay? But what is the fundamental objective of a school system? To teach kids. All right, and it's not going on. So we can stand up here and have a discussion all afternoon about, well, it's this and it's this over here, and the teachers or the parents. I get that. But what are we spending $1.2 billion for? For failure? So the discussion we need to have then about education is how do we go about putting together a model of an education system that's going to start better serving these kids, and forget about the fact, it's not all the teachers, it's hardly the teacher's fault. But then why is that teacher passing them on to the next grade? Well, because that's the school district policy. That's a problem. Social promotion, it's called. Let's stop that. Well, then what do? These kids are all stuck in the third grade. I don't have all the answers, but let's stop some of the policies that are contributing to this, because you can't take a kid who's in fifth grade and pass him on to sixth when he's reading at a third grade level. You are doing a disservice to that kid. So I think we can look at some of the policies and some of the things that I talked about earlier. I understand it isn't all the school's fault, but that's their job is to educate kids, and if it's not being done, they bear some of the responsibility.
Wait, other questions? Please raise your hand. Where? I'm sorry? Right over here? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question about voting rights. In our state constitution, voting is a right. We've had lots of legislation lately working on, some people would say, disenfranchising citizens who have the right to vote. And the excuse or the reason is voter fraud. So I guess I'm asking, in Milwaukee County, Sheriff Clarke, how many arrests have you made or your department made for voter fraud? And how many convictions have there been for voter fraud here in Milwaukee County? Since voter fraud is a big excuse for working to disenfranchise eligible voters.
Okay, thank you for the question. The first answer is real easy, zero. My agency hasn't made any arrests for voter fraud. I only know about as much as you all from what we read in the paper about certain incidents of voter fraud, arrests that are made. The DA would be able, the District Attorney John Chisholm would be able to answer how many have been prosecuted, how many have been charged, how many investigations. That's a hot button issue, obviously. The voting thing, the ID, so on and so forth. I enforce the law. I don't make the law. So I want that discussion to play itself out in the public square with the discourse that's going to take place with that, and in the legislature. Whatever the legislature hands down, that's what I got to enforce, whether I like it or not. Because when law enforcement, and not just law enforcement, but executives, right? Mayors, governors enforce the law. Presidents enforce the law. When we start picking and choosing based on our personal beliefs, we're going to be in big trouble as a society. And I don't want to go there, so I'm going to let this thing play itself out. I'm not going to infuse my personal feelings about the voter issue. I'll wait and see what happens. The court decision will be coming down, and they're talking about maybe going back into session. Whatever the legislature hands down to me as enforcing the law, that's what I'll enforce.
Let me take one more question back there. Yeah, go ahead.
Sheriff Clarke, one area where people have different views on education seem to agree that a key problem in schools is chronically disruptive kids in the classroom. What are your views on what should be done with respect to those students?
All right, ironically, I got that question this morning at a Rotary Club I was at. Many of these classrooms, and I've been in them, schools, I go there often, I read to kids. I love, whenever I get invited to read, I take an opportunity to do that. Some of these schools and some of these classrooms, not all, some of them, they're very chaotic environment. That environment is not conducive for learning. You folks know that, right? So the schools are struggling with what to do with these disruptive kids. Policy used to be suspend them, expel them, get them out of the classroom, then what happens after that, right? So we got to, not today, but we need to figure that out. But they switched the policy to artificially bring the numbers down in terms of expulsions and suspensions so it can say we're not suspending as many kids, but now you're leaving this disruptive kid in this environment. And who knows why they're being disruptive. I know there's special needs. We got to figure this out. But forcing them into that environment that is already a challenge for teachers in terms of these kids come in, they're not in a state of readiness to learn, and being able to set up an environment where learning can take place, it can't take place with all this disruption. There's enough that the teacher's dealing with already with these kids. Many of them, like I said, I say baggage, but I say it affects them. They come with a lot of stuff, issues. So to force them back in there, I think is questionable policy. Here's, I think, something we need to talk about. Like I said, I got a lot of ideas. I don't have all the answers. I don't know. I'm not looking to create any more headlines than...
Here we go.
I think that there's, for the most disruptive, we know why a lot of this is going on, including the special needs and whatnot, but it's not all special needs kids that are creating these disturbances, so don't take that out of context. I think we ought to revisit the concept of boarding schools for these kids that we used to expel and just throw them in a room or throw them in a reform school, and we call them alternative schools. I've been in these alternative schools. They're a joke. All they're doing is housing these kids for the 8 hours that they're required to by law. All right, but I'll tell you quickly, you all know the boarding school concept, because it would be a consistent and ongoing environment for these kids to get their lives back together and under control. If you just hold them for a certain, 8 hours, 6 hours, whatever, and then send them back into the chaos in their neighborhoods and homes, you're not doing these kids any good. A boarding school is not the worst thing in the world. Marty Stein had a concept. God bless his soul. I knew Marty personally, worked with him a lot with his boarding school concept. And he worked tirelessly up until the day he died to be able to start one boarding school. And that's why I was working with him on that, because we could do a pilot. We don't have to start all these boarding schools all over. But you're taking these kids out of that very chaotic environment at home where they're getting no effective parenting. All right? They don't have the needs. They're not being, fed properly. So, but if we put them in an environment where they're there all day and they're there all night, yeah, you can let them go home on weekends, whatever, but with role models and with some proven template for dealing with kids who have these issues, you have to do it consistently, which is why I say boarding. You can't send them home at the end of the day back into the chaos. But I think a boarding school concept is something that should be talked about. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, keeping them in the classroom, that's foolish.
I'm going to take 1 minute here before we go, and we'll thank Sheriff Clarke in just a moment, but I just want to let everybody in this room know about our final few events of this semester. We have a busy week, the week of April 21st, and you're all invited to join us for any or all of these events. On Monday, April 21st, we have retired General James Jones. He's the former National Security Advisor for the Obama administration, but actually he's spending a lot of time these days talking about energy security. He is a proponent of the Keystone Pipeline. He'll be here to talk about a range of issues, including what's happening in Ukraine. So that's on the 21st. On the 22nd, music mogul turned social entrepreneur Kenny Gamble Jr. Sheriff Clarke and I are old enough to know of the Philadelphia Sound, which was a...
Speak for yourself.
Well, I think we're pretty close in age here. But Kenny Gamble was the co-creator of this sound. A lot of huge records, but interesting guy. He moved back to his old South Philadelphia neighborhood because he wanted to try and revitalize that neighborhood. Today, they're doing a lot in terms of investing in neighborhoods in Philadelphia, but they've just opened a couple of MPS charter schools in Milwaukee, and so we'll talk to him about why Milwaukee and sort of what he believes has to happen for urban revitalization. And then on Wednesday, we'll have U.S. Senator, the 23rd, we'll have U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin. One final note, on May 15th, we'll announce this probably in the next day or so, big conference here at the law school. Craig Gilbert from the Washington Bureau Chief of the Journal-Sentinel has been working with Professor Charles Franklin here at the law school. They've been doing a deep data dive on voting trends in this area, and they've found some pretty remarkable information. That will be the subject of a series in the Journal-Sentinel, but we'll be doing a conference looking at the implications of that for campaigns, for public policy, for political engagement. So that will be announced next couple days, and it'll be May 15th. You're all welcome. I just want to say thanks to everyone who came out today for this event. Thanks for your attention, for your questions. Most of all, thanks to you, Sheriff David A. Clarke, Jr. Thank you.